But what I'm trying to highlight is in the early days, it's about getting experience with it. It's about getting comfort with it. It's about building a regular investment plan so that you're doing it consistently over time. It's about getting used to market fluctuations. All of those things are why you're doing it, not for that, little bit of alpha that you might get.
Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew. Bills, here we are back again and back on the wireless. Got it right this time.
Well, considering what we're going to talk about, Andrew, today and the age group that we're going to talk about, we probably should redact those comments and not talk about the wireless. Maybe we'll do that a little bit later. But yes, bringing a whole heap of value to our listeners and our viewers today. Andrew, what are we talking to everybody about? Actually, not just today, but we're doing a 3-part series.
Today, next week, and the week after.
That's it.
Yeah, so doing a 3-part series where we're going to do a little bit of a breakdown and a bit of a generalization because everyone's obviously in a different boat. But we're going to talk about 3 different age brackets. We're going to talk about your 30s, your 40s, and your 50s. And what you should and what a lot of people will focus on in those different age brackets as you're going through your wealth creation journey. So kicking things off today, we're really going to talk about the foundation stage is what we're going to call it, of building wealth in your 30s. We're going to talk about some of the things that you should be focusing on. We're going to be talking about, some of the things that are going to be considerations. And also within that, we're going to be talking about some of the conflicting things that happen in that age bracket and that we see pretty often, and how you can start navigating that to build the foundations of your financial security.
Yeah. Yep. No, this is going to be a really juicy one, Andrew. And I might just even start this with a bit of a comical flair with it. But I actually think, when you think about the thing that is going to dictate the quality of life that you've got, I think there's really 2 things. The first thing is what you do for a living or for a profession. I think that's pretty straightforward. But the other one is who your life partner is. So if you can nail and get those 2 things right, I think it's going to be a lot easier. So what we're going to talk about is maybe some of the other stuff
relationship advice,
with
how to choose the right partner.
That's just to let everybody know that we're starting a different podcast series. That's 360. What is it? Relationship advice or something?
It's actually going to be Stacey and Sam.
There you go. Perfect.
Right. So they're going to be the ones. So Billy and I's wives. They're going to start a podcast talking about how to select the right partner, because they obviously selected it perfectly.
They nailed it. 100%. So yeah, let's just caveat and say, okay, those 2 things are an absolute given. That ties into the first dot point that you're going to talk about, but you get that right, you're on the good pathway. If you don't, you're probably going to struggle a little bit, generally speaking, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how to bring us back on track after that. I guess, look, one of the things that, Billy obviously touched on is getting the right career, right?
Yeah.
So in your 30s, you're starting from you're building the foundations of your financial security. And so a lot of, time, effort and energy is maximizing, your income growth, maximizing how much you can grow your income, because that's also going to dictate on what's going to be possible later. So outside of obviously the scope of financial planning and outside of the scope of what we do, on a day-to-day basis, but having an element of, and whether this is time expenditure or whether this is money expenditure, but making sure that you're focusing on how do I actually advance my career? How do I advance my income? Or, how do I build a side business, which is also going to, create an additional income stream that's ultimately coming in. but spending money on, and time on personal development, which is then going to feed, income development in the future, is another thing that that you really should, or one of the first things that will form part of the foundations of your financial security in the future. I caveat it because you can do too much into this, and I have seen it a few times before, where it's don't spend all of your money on just, hey, this is personal development, hey, this is another personal development course, hey, another personal development course, and it's just not actually materializing into anything other than just feeding a dopamine hit of I feel good when I go to these, hoorah sessions. But yeah, focus on yourself, focus on developing yourself as a person, and that's going to put you in good stead, as time goes on.
It's almost like using the same analogy of somebody that continues to go to university or education and keeps doing it and doing it and doing it, but never actually uses those skill sets and deploys them for anything.
Isn't that just the college professor, Billy? Apologies to everyone.
No, I said your dad.
Yeah, well, my dad's a teacher, actually. I said
that.
college professors because
it's in America.
It's in America.
Yeah, it doesn't apply to us
in our podcast anyway.
But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, the income component is critical. When you think about the foundation stage in building wealth, obviously the more income that you earn, and for those watching on YouTube, it's probably going to be a bit easier because I've got my hands moving, but the more you earn, the bigger the gap that you can potentially have, and this is a relevant point for the next one, the bigger the gap you can potentially have to maximize your surplus to then be able to deploy into wealth creation strategies. Whereas if your income is lower, then obviously a lot of that income needs to go towards your living expenses, and it's a lot harder to try and extract that surplus into something else. So I think that's a common thing, and we're only talking about the 30s, but if we went back slightly, in your 20s, it's building up those skill sets to then be able to start to capitalize on it, and then over time, you're increasing your income with the skills that you've learned. And that should be just something that we've got across all of the age brackets, but in particular, we've called it out in the foundation stage, being in your 30s.
Yeah, absolutely. And, building on that and, talking about exactly what you were referring to is what you can do will be dictated by what your surplus income is.
Yep. So
if your income is really high and your expenses are also really high, well, all of a sudden, you're, in my mind, you're just as wealthy as someone who has, maybe a lower income level, but their expenses are significantly lower and has that gap. So making sure that in your 30s, I think that budgeting, I think the cash flow management, I think that getting those skills, and it is a skill, really under wraps, is probably one of, if not the most important thing that you can do. Because if you don't have a solid cash flow plan, if you don't, have a surplus income, well, then your ability to do anything is pretty much zero.
Yep.
So work on your cash flow, work on your budgeting, work on the things that are going to give you the foundations, because in your 30s, very likely, your income is going to go up. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have a solid plan around your cash flow, your budgeting, then ultimately what will very likely happen, which is what happens with most people, is income goes up, your expenses have, a little bit of an increase. Income goes up, expenses have a bit of an increase. And that, surplus, if there is any surplus, effectively stays the same. And what it should be is, okay, these are my expenses, this is where things stand. Income goes up. Okay, now I'm making a decision on, what happens with my expenses.
Yep.
Hey, I need to reward myself. You can't, I don't think that it's sustainable for you to just say, hey, I'm living this frivolous lifestyle of income's going to go up, but I'm going to keep my expenses like I was, in uni and sharing a house with, 15 other guys. And
2-minute noodles.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's not sustainable. But if you can then say, hey, I've had a 10% increase in income, and so as a result, I'm going to increase my expenses from an enjoyment side of things by, 3% here, and then I'm going to capture that 7%, in investment somewhere else. That's what you should be doing.
Yeah, so really talking about avoiding lifestyle inflation, and that becomes challenging. It just becomes challenging as you tend to get older anyway, coming from someone in their late 30s. But the system, the way that businesses have been set up, the marketing, subscription services, because that seems to be a really big thing these days, you need to have that discipline because there's a lot of smart people, there's a lot of dollars going into figuring out how to extract money through products and services to get those dollars that you've got in your wallet, right?
It's like you're a computer and there's all of these hackers that are just trying to, extract information out, but they're trying to extract money out. And it's like, if you don't have a cybersecurity or something to stop that, then it's just going to, continually come out. You have to have a protection mechanism in place.
I think Andrew's been looking at my diary because our IT vendor is coming here to do our annual visit today. But and the other thing too is you've also got social media, and I don't even know if we can call it social media anymore. It's just media. All of that is positioned to see that and kind of highlight the best aspects of people's lifestyles. And it's a bit of a fallacy because it creates this concept and keeping up with the Joneses and all of that sort of stuff. So lifestyle creep, lifestyle inflation is one of those things that if you can keep that in check, I think that serves you quite well, coupled with a solid budget and cash flow strategy. Andrew, what's the next one?
The next one is really when you're starting to talk about and think about investing. Now, at least in your 30s, I think that there's, probably, I guess, maybe a couple of cohorts of people, or depending on where you sit in this. But if you're starting, in your 30s and you're basically starting from scratch, then it's, okay, what's that surplus income? What do I do with it? Mm-hmm. Start small, make sure that your first, emergency fund, like get 3-6 months worth of expenses, whatever it is, depending on your circumstances. But, make sure that you're building your emergency fund and that's, going to get taken care of so that if anything does happen, you've got a backup mechanism in place. I'm just summarizing here and we'll start to delve into the details, but maybe it's, okay, now I'm going to start investing, and it isn't necessarily, at least when you're talking about smaller numbers, it's not necessarily about the returns. Mm-hmm. That for me is, one of the big things. Like if you're starting investing with $10,000, if that investment performs at, 10% and you get $1,000 at the end of it, or if that investment performs at, 7% and you get $700 out of it, is that $300 actually going to change your lifestyle and dictate, whether you, grow your wealth or don't? No, that's not what it's about.
Yep.
And I'm not trying to dissuade people from investing here, but what I'm trying to highlight is in the early days, it's about getting experience with it. It's about getting comfort with it. It's about building a regular investment plan so that you're doing it consistently over time. It's about getting used to market fluctuations. All of those things are why you're doing it, not for that, little bit of alpha that you might get.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, they're the key investment principles. So it's sort of tacking onto that, the education piece and the experience piece.
That's what it's all about.
It is designed to essentially set you up for a future of, I guess, continual investing, and coupling that with the previous point, not about the emergency fund, but the previous point about the budgeting and having a surplus. If you can select, an amount of money that you can isolate and use that to invest, and you get those disciplines in place, especially if you do it in your early 30s, the compounding effect of what that looks like is absolutely phenomenal and life-changing. So, yeah, education, experience, and ultimately feeling comfort with it, knowing that, and throwing back to probably last week's episode, but knowing that there's volatility and uncertainty, and that's just life. But this is the right discipline to do because, I think we owe it to ourselves that we need to be able to grow our wealth to increase our financial security and prosperity.
Yeah, exactly right. Yep. And, investing doesn't have to be just as simple as, putting money into an ETF or putting money into a, fund manager like that. That could be investing, but maybe it's, hey, I'm going to salary sacrifice $20 a week. Or maybe it's, what we're talking about here is start small and build it up over time is ultimately what it is. Or maybe it's something larger. For a lot of people in their 30s, you're talking about buying your first property. If that's the case, the big or the cautionary thing that I'll do in this segment is, okay, you're talking about buying your first property. A lot of people will say it's not investing, it's a lifestyle decision. House isn't an asset and all of that stuff.
If it's an owner-occupier you're talking about?
Yeah, if it's an owner-occupier. BS. Your owner-occupied property is an investment. You can, gloss it up however you like and say, oh, it's not an investment, I'm making a lifestyle choice and all of that stuff. But if you're buying a crappy asset that's not going to grow in value, that's going to stay the same, and what you spend today is going to be the same as what you spend as what you're going to get in the future, then all of a sudden you're talking about, okay, in your 30s, that might have suited your lifestyle because you wanted to live in a particular area and have a particular lifestyle. But when you're then ready to take that next step, you haven't built equity, it hasn't grown in value, it hasn't performed, and all of a sudden it's hamstringing what is possible in the future. So even if it's an owner-occupied asset, it's still an investment asset. You still need to make sure it's a good quality asset that's going to grow and do its thing.
Tax-free too.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
Thinking about the property aspect, and it's a different environment today than what it was a couple of years ago in terms of how much can you borrow, relatively speaking, in an absolute perspective versus how much you can earn and service. So obviously serviceability has changed quite dramatically because interest rates have increased, and we shouldn't even say increased, we should say that they've normalised.
Normalised, yeah.
But if you think about what that looks like, making sure that if property is one of the ways that you are going about it, thinking through what life could potentially look like, and just thinking about your early 30s, you might be getting married, you might be traveling, you might be starting a family, it might be all of these things, thinking through that and coming back to the lifestyle creep and lifestyle inflation, but your expenses are probably going to increase. So thinking through that and being mindful around how much is the right amount to borrow.
Yeah.
And I think there's two trains of thought. There's one, how much will the bank lend me? And what does that look like on paper versus how much do we feel comfortable borrowing, knowing that expenses are going to go up? As an example, if we're thinking of starting a family, maybe one member of the household is going to take a little bit more time off work. There's going to be disruptions to income, all of that sort of stuff. So around the property piece, it's just thinking through it a little bit further, going, okay, not just what can we do and afford today, but what's it going to look like in the next couple of years? And it gets, when you do start a family, generally speaking, it gets harder before it gets better.
Yeah, exactly right. So look, Bills, I think that covered us in terms of building the foundations of your wealth creation, and so I think that's the first part of our 3-part series. We'll come back next week and talk about in your 40s, what are the things that you should be focusing on and the considerations around that. So thanks again for another podcast, Bills.
Andrew, thank you. And to our listeners and our viewers, hopefully you got a whole heap of value out of that. If you do, like, subscribe, share with your friends. If you wanted to get in contact to have a chat about your circumstances, reach out to Andrew and myself. We'd be more than happy to chat. And we look forward to catching you on the next one.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we've talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amiridis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Pty Ltd, authorized representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.